Okay, we are going to talk about consonants this week, and that includes consonants in English and also some pretty common consonants cross-linguistically that appear in other languages of the world. And so in this first part, I'll give you an overview of what we're trying to learn when we learn about consonants. And then I will have separate sections of this lecture that deal with all the different dimensions of consonant contrast that we're going to deal with in this class. And there are primarily three features that we want to know about consonants for this class. There are various other kinds of minor and secondary other kinds of features, but basically we're just looking for three things about consonants for this class. And that's going to be the place of articulation, the manner of articulation, and the laryngeal properties of the sounds involved. So briefly, there will be more details on each of these, but the place of articulation is going to correspond to which articulators in your vocal tract are making the constriction. In other words, where is the relevant movement in your vocal tract? If you're making it with your lips, it's going to be labial place of articulation, and so on and so forth. Manner of articulation refers to how the consonant is made. So what kind of constriction exists in the vocal tract, where constriction is just any way of narrowing your vocal tract. Anytime you bring two pieces of your anatomy together, that's a constriction, right? And so the main difference between vowels and consonants is that vowels tend to have wider constrictions, right? So they tend to be relatively wide and unconstrained or unconstricted vocal tracts, while consonants tend to be somewhat narrower constrictions. How narrow depends on the kind of consonant it is, and that's basically what manner of articulation refers to, right? So place of articulation is where in the vocal tract are you doing something, and manner of articulation is what exactly are you doing at that location. Right? And then laryngeal properties, which we actually talked about in the vowel sections. For this class, we're mainly going to be interested in voicing. That's going to be the main laryngeal property that's relevant in English. Of course, in other languages, there are other laryngeal features that might be quite relevant, and we might mention those from time to time, but we're mostly going to be concerned with voicing, which is the main laryngeal contrast in English, where, if you remember from last week, voicing corresponds to what the glottis or the larynx is doing while you're speaking. In general, when we talked about vowels, we just sort of assumed the glottis is always vibrating in those vowels. And that's generally true in just about every language. Most or all vowels are always voiced. Of course, sometimes some vowels in some languages might not have full voicing, but that's a different subject for another time. In general, vowels are going to be voiced, but consonants in many languages, not every language, but many languages, consonants can contrast for whether they're voiced or voiceless, whether the glottis is vibrating or not vibrating while you're making the sound. So that's going to be the main laryngeal property we will look at in this class. And as I mentioned, there's going to be other kinds of features that exist, and a lot of those sort of secondary features will be written with diacritics. What's a diacritic? Well, in the IPA, we have these sort of main characters that look like letters, right? So this is some kind of a voiceless coronal stop, duh, right? But then there's also various kinds of diacritics, which are extra little symbols that you can add to a main character to indicate that it has some sort of additional feature. So one that came up in the homework was this diacritic. It's kind of like a vertical line, and that means it's an ejective stop, which is a laryngeal property. It means that it's made with simultaneous constrictions in your larynx and with your tongue tip near the alveolar ridge, and so this would have a very strong glottalized release, kind of like ah, as opposed to plain coronal stop, da. So da, da. There can be other various kinds of diacritics. This little tiny bracket thing underneath would say that it's a dental sound rather than being alveolar. And there's other kinds of different diacritics you can put on this. We're going to be not so concerned with these for the most part in this class. If these show up in an assignment or something, you can look them up in the IPA chart. I'll try to tell you what any unusual sounds are that we run across in the course of doing problems. But in general, we're going to be mainly concerned with these three parameters: place of articulation, manner of articulation, and voicing, right? And we're not going to be super concerned with the secondary features. Yeah. So shown in the bottom left of the first page here is a chart from a textbook with their rendering of what the English consonant system is like. And I'll be using something roughly like this in this class. We'll go through each of these sounds in detail later in this lecture. But in general, this is basically what we're going to use for the English consonants. And of course, we're also going to be looking at lots of data in languages other than English, and those will have slightly different sets of consonants. But these ones are certainly going to feature in a lot of the materials. Obviously, I tend to focus on English in this class because it's the only language that we all are guaranteed to have in common. And so basically the chart in table 2.12 on the bottom left of the first page of the handout has all of the English consonant sounds arranged by their place of articulation. That's the left to right dimension in the table, going from the front of the vocal tract, the lips, all the way to the back at the glottis. And then on the vertical dimension here, you have two things. First of all, there's manner of articulation. And those are the leftmost indications here. Stop, fricative, affricate, nasal, liquid, glide. Those are manners of articulation. And then within each of those, you have, for some of them, a distinction in voiceless and voiced sounds. For other ones, you have other kinds of minor distinctions, which I will talk about later on in this lecture. But in general, that's how it's going to be organized. One overarching thing, the English consonant system is much less weird than the English vowel system, right? So we talked about the English vowel system last week. It's very complicated. It's very typologically unusual from a cross-linguistic perspective. There's really no other language in the world with a vowel system just like English. It's a very strange vowel system. Our consonant system is not so unusual. It's much closer to what you might call normal. And of course, there's no absolute standard for what constitutes a normal consonant system, but certainly it's a little bit less crazy than our vowel system. So in the next couple videos, I'll go through all the phonetic details of how these different classes of consonants get made.